Welcome back. As mentioned, during this session, we will use a powerful alternative noting technique called subtle noting. You already have experience with noting, so this session's instructions are an adjunct to what you know. Last session, the things that we noted were the most obvious when you paused to look in any moment. As a result, they were most likely relatively gross or concrete types of things. The goal with this version of noting is to train yourself to increasingly note the more and even the most subtle aspects of your experience. The example from last session of looking inside and having an emotion be what you notice as most prevalent is a great one. You might not think of an emotion as concrete, but in fact it is when the mind gets a hold of it. Consider an emotion like fear, although for you it's an actual dynamic experience that you're going through personally. When your mind latches onto it, it can clearly identify it, can recognize and categorize it, and it can turn the experience of it into an object to note. Everything from last session was relatively similar. However, there are more subtle processes that are occurring within you all the time. You became aware of some of these various forms during the awareness-based exercises that we used earlier in the program, and you examined them from a number of different perspectives. This session's tool will allow you to continue that type of exploration in new ways. There are some major changes to noting for this method. The first major change involves a shift to primarily using words that end with ing. These words are most often process-based words, rather than words that describe things that are easily objectified by the mind. Although you will start by noting, as you did in the past session, whatever is most present in this moment's experience, during the session, you'll do it with a big change. Rather than continuing in that way and just noting the dominant thing that you notice in a given moment, such as an emotion, you'll instead, over the course of the session, begin to search increasingly beyond that for more subtle aspects of your experience that can be described with words or phrases that will typically end in ing. You used some of these in the last session, such as hearing, seeing, and so on. Those are on the grosser end of the range of these words. However, notice that they are processes. They're not easily turned into objects by the mind. Although it's fine to use those in this session as well, you want to increasingly get beyond them to more subtle forms of your experience as your sessions progress. To give you an idea of the types of experiences you're searching for to note from moment to moment in this session, you can download a PDF with a list of words and phrases that have resonated with previous participants from the download section on this page. It's called the Subtle Noting Words List. These range from grosser terms like itching and hearing to subtler ones like flowing and being. Many of the words on the list have been made up to better capture the essence of a moment than real words can, because real words are often designed to be more concrete. They're really objects, that are used by the mind. Feel free to make up your own words and phrases, and also to use words or phrases that do not end in ing, if that's what seems most appropriate for you in the moment. The goal in any moment is to use a word or phrase that most authentically captures what is in your experience. If no word or phrase comes to you, feel free to say "don't know," just like you did during the last session, or perhaps more appropriately for this session, an alternative word ending in ing, such as blanking. You want to try to reach a place where your awareness is simply spontaneously noting the increasingly subtle aspects of your moment-to-moment experience, with as little premeditation or intention as possible. Though it's most likely going to take a little bit of practice, you want the effort involved in that practice to be as minimal as you can and still have it be effective. And you want that effort to diminish over time as the process becomes increasingly automatic. The second major change involves how the session evolves over time. Most likely you will start with grosser level words, but after a minute or so, you want to very gently start to shift your attention to ever subtler aspects of your experience. Make this shift as effortlessly as you can. You may notice that your experience oscillates back and forth between more gross and more subtle experiences. That's perfectly fine. Allow those oscillations to occur and note what's present and occurring for you in them without any judgment. You may find that your attention shifts and remains for parts of each session on aspects of your experience, such as sensations, thoughts, feelings, and emotions. In other words, more gross level things. You may also find that your attention shifts to more subtle aspects involving awareness itself. The processes of being aware, of experiencing, of being conscious, and so forth. As you gently and increasingly shift your attention to ever subtler aspects, you will likely notice that they emerge more into the foreground and have a greater degree of persistence during the session. This is the direction that you're looking for during this practice. A third major change involves the pacing of your sessions. As with the last course session, you will start by noting a word or phrase immediately after the previous one if you're doing a solo practice. And if that's not possible, remember that it should not take longer than 1 to 3 seconds. And if you can't make it in that range, to say either don't know or a more subtle version of it, like blanking. And also, as with the last session, if you're doing paired noting, wait until your partner speaks before you speak again. But unlike this past session, be comfortable allowing your tempo to slow as words and phrases become ever more subtle. Subtle noting seems to naturally evolve into a slower rhythm than the type of noting from last session. In fact, you or your partner may experience periods where silence feels more natural than noting. Such silences are fine. If your partner drops into silence and you feel it's appropriate for you, you can follow them into the deep experience of silence yourself. If it doesn't feel appropriate for you, you can use that time to continue to note silently to yourself until your partner says something. At that point, resume taking turns noting. Here are some other guidelines for this session's subtle noting practice. From the previous session of noting, you probably already have a sense for whether you prefer solo or paired noting. Your preference may remain the same for subtle noting, or it may not. It's important to reevaluate your prior preference for this new version of the method. For this coming session of subtle noting, try to do one solo session to begin with, and then one paired session. And then for the remaining days of this session, focus the subsequent sessions of subtle noting on whichever of those two approaches seems to resonate the most with you. Or if it's a mix that seems most powerful, that's fine. Just go with that mix. With traditional noting, the primary benefit of paired noting is accountability. It's simply harder for your mind to wander if someone else is expecting a response from you. That remains true for paired subtle noting, but there's an added benefit that's similar to what you most likely observed during the group awareness exercise. The other person may notice or say things that you recognize in your own subtle experience, or things that cause you to notice things that you might not have otherwise. So, from this perspective, there can be some additional benefit to doing paired subtle noting versus the solo version. And there can also be a greater resonance and benefit when doing it with some of your small group members versus others, because perhaps what they're saying triggers and generates more options and brings more awareness to your own interior experience. At times, you might find yourself responding to or even mirroring your partner's language as your observations about the moment emerge. That's slightly more acceptable during this form of noting than the previous one, but try not to be too distracted or influenced by the experiences of your partner. It's okay if they provide some insights for you, but they shouldn't consistently lead you. And just as with the previous form of paired noting, you need to make sure that a groupthink isn't developing between the two of you. Also, just as you may have experienced with a group awareness exercise, there may be a temptation to hear what your partner is experiencing and judge your own experiences based on it. You may feel like they're going further than you or something like that. It's important to avoid that and to focus your attention on what is happening within you from as judgment-free a perspective as possible. Aim for sessions of at least 1 hour. And this is one of those practices where going considerably longer, even as long as 3 hours, can be very beneficial when you can do it. This allows for plenty of time for you to deeply wind your way down into the most subtle aspects of your experience. I know that won't be possible for all or even many of you, so just do your best to take maximum advantage of this method while you can. Set a timer to signal the end of your session. If you're doing paired noting, it's a good idea to allow some time to debrief with your partner. And if you're doing paired noting, the best idea is to use only audio rather than audio and video. Participants have found that this allows them to go deeper. It's also best to use headphones or earphones that have an embedded microphone that you can put close to your mouth. You may find that there are times when you want to speak very, very softly as you get into more subtle aspects of the experience, and this will help the other person to be able to hear you without having to strain. Headphones can also eliminate echoes and other distracting audio issues. If practical, you can record your sessions and experiment later with listening to how those sessions affect you. That's something that some people have found beneficial. We recommend starting with your eyes closed and planning to spend most, if not all, of each session this way. Having said that, some participants have found it useful to have their eyes open for at least part of a session. Subtle noting with eyes open can help to ward off sleep when you're drowsy. It can also, and more importantly, allow you to more deeply note aspects of your experience that relate to vision. And once you are accomplished at subtle noting, practicing with your eyes open might help you to integrate subtler and subtler experiences with your normal waking experiences. After all, you won't go about your day with your eyes closed. Finally, keep in mind, as with the last session, you want to continue to do noting whenever you can throughout the day. It's a good idea to see how subtle you can make that, even if there is only a little bit of time that you have available. It's a bit difficult to understand what a subtle noting session is like just from the descriptions you've heard so far. So we've provided a recorded sample on this page called Subtle Noting Example MP3. The next and final phase of your instruction for this session is to listen to that audio file. It can also be a good idea to try to experiment and note along with that audio session to kind of get a feel for it and help you wind your way into it. Okay, that's it. Go ahead and listen to the recorded paired subtle noting session now, and I'll see you next time.